I'm reading Robin Hood. It's a very good book. You've never read it before? I've read it several times actually. This is a very old copy. I suppose if I had children, I would read it to them. I don't have any children. My husband died long ago, years ago. Thank you for your condolences. You wanted me to read it to you? I suppose. I'm on this train to New Orleans. You're going there too? Okay. You feel you want me to read to you? You don't have anything else to occupy yourself with? No? Okay. Well, I suppose there's no harm in that. I've got nowhere to be, technically. At this moment in it, I don't feel like you're going to let me read on my own. So, I'll come a little closer. That might make it easier for you to hear me. Yes, Robin Hood by Gilbert. Very, very old copy. Quite worn. I've read it several times now. Alright then. If you're sure. Robin Hood, Chapter 1. How Robin became an outlaw. It was high noon in summertime, and the forest seemed to sleep. Hardly a breeze stirred in the broad fans of the oak leaves, and the only sound was the low hum of insects, which flew to and fro unnecessarily in the cool twilight under the wide, spreading boughs. So quiet did it seem, so lonely, that almost one might think of it nothing but the wild deer, or his fierce enemy, the slinking wolf, and he had ever walked this way since the beginning of the world. There was a little path worn among thick bushes of hazel, dogberry, and traveller's joy, but so narrow was it, and so faint, that it could well have been worn by the slender, fleeting feet of the doe, or even by the hares and rabbits, which had their home in the great bank among the roots of a beech nearby. Few, indeed, were the folks that ever came this way, for it was in the loneliest part of Barnesdale forest. Besides, who had any right to come here, save it with the king's foresters keeping strict watch and ward over the king's deer? Nevertheless, the rabbits which should have been feeding before their holes, or playing their mad pranks, seemed to have bolted into their burrows as if scared by something which had passed that way. Only now, indeed, were one or two peeping out to see that things were quiet again. Then, with the venturesome bunny suddenly scampered out, and in a moment others trooped forth. A man stood close by the path, behind a tree, and looked out into the glade. He was dressed in a tunic made of a rough green cloth, open at the top and showing a bronzed neck. Round his waist was a broad leathern girdle, in which were stuck at one place a dagger, and at the other side 3 long arrows. Short breeches of soft leather covered his thighs, below which he wore hosen of green wool, which reached to his feet. The latter were encased in shoes of stout pig's leather. His head of dark brown curls was covered by a velvet cap, at the side of which was stuck a short feather, pulled it from the wing of a plover. His face, bronzed to a ruddy tan by wind and weather, was open and frank. His eyes shone like a wild bird's, and was as fearless and as noble. Great of limb was he, and seemingly of a strength beyond his age, which was about 25 years. In one hand he carried a long bow, while the other rested on the smooth bowl of the beach before him. He looked intently at some bushes which stood a little distance before him in the glade, and moved not a muscle while he watched. Sometimes he looked beyond far to the side of the glade, where on the edge of the shore or wood 2 or 3 deer were feeding under the trees, advancing toward where he stood. Suddenly he saw the bushes move stealthily. An unkempt head issued between the leaves, and the haggard face of a man looked wearily this way and that. Next moment, out of the bush, where the hidden man lay, an arrow sped. Straight to the feeding deer it sank in the breast of the nearest doe. Not at once did the hidden man issue from his hiding place to take up the animal he had slain. He waited patiently while one might count 50, for he knew that should there be a forester skulking near, who should not meet the scampering deer, whose companion had been struck down, he would know from their frightened air that something wrongful had been done, and he would search for the door. The moment went slowly by, and nothing moved. Neither did the hidden man, nor he who watched himself. Nor did the forester show himself on the edge of the shore where the deer had fled. Feeling himself secure, therefore, the man came from the bush, but there was no bow. There was no bow and arrows in his hand, for these he had left secure in his hidden place, to be brought away another day. He had dressed in the rough and ragged homespun of a villain, a rope round his brown tunic, and his lower limbs half covered with loose trousers of the same material as his tunic, but more holed and patched. Looking this way and that, he walked half bent across to where the doe lay, and leaning over it, he snatched his knife from his belt and began almost feverishly to cut portions of the tenderest parts from the carcass. As the man behind the tree saw him, he seemed to recognize him and muttered, "Poor lad." The villain wrapped the deer's flesh in a rough piece of cloth, and then rose and disappeared between the trees. Then, with swift and noiseless footsteps, the watcher sent back through the path and into the depths of the forest. Suddenly, as he came from behind the giant trunk of an oak, the tall form of the man who had watched him stood in his pathway. Instantly, his hand went to his knife, and he seemed about to spring upon the other. "Man," said he in the green tunic, "what madness drives you to this?" The villain recognized the speaker at once and gave a fierce laugh. "Madness," he said. "'Tis not for myself this time, Master Robin, but my little lad is dying of hunger, and while there's deer in the green wood, he shall not starve." "Your little lad, Scarlet?" said Robin. "Is your sister's son living with you now?" "Aye," replied Scarlet. "You've been away these 3 weeks and cannot have heard?" He spoke in a hard voice while the two continued their walk down a path so narrow that while Robin walked before, Scarlet was compelled to walk just behind. "Just a night since," Scarlet went on, "my sister's husband John, a green, was taken ill and died. What did our Lord's steward do? Said, 'Out ye go, baggage, and fend for yourself. The holding is for a man who'll do services for it.' 'Twas like Guy of Gisborne do thus." And, said Robin, "the evil-hearted traitor!" Out she went with no more than the rags which covered herself and the bairns. Said Scarlet fiercely, "If I had been by, I could not have kept my knife from his throat. She came to me, dazed she was, and ill. She had the hunger plague, in truth, and sickened and died last week. The 2 little ones were taken in by neighbors, but I kept little Gilbert myself. I am a lonely man, and I love the lad, and if harm should happen to him, I shall put my mark upon Guy of Gisborne for it." as Robin had listened to the short and tragic story of the wreck of a poor villaine's home. His heart burned in rage against the steward, Sir Guy of Gisborne, who ruled the manor of Birkencar, for the white monks of St. Mary's Abbey with so harsh a hand. But he knew that the steward did no more than the abbot and monks permitted him, and he cursed the whole brood of them, rich and proud as they were, given over to hunting and high living and the services and rents which they wrung from the villains, who were looked upon merely as part of the soil of the manors which they tilled. Robin, or Robert of Locksley, as he was known to the steward and the monks, was a freeman, or stockman, as it was termed, and was a young man of wealth, as things went then. He had his own house and land, a farm, some 160 acres of the richest land on the verge of the manor, and he knew full well that the monks had long cast covetous eyes upon his little holding. It lay beside the forest, and he called the Outwoods. Robin held his land at a rent, and so long as he paid this to the monks, they could not legally oust him from his farm. Much as they would have liked to do this, Robin was looked upon by the abbot and his discontented and malicious man. He had often bearded the abbot in his own monastery, and told him to his face how wickedly he and his stewards treated the villains and poorer tenants of their manors. Such defiance in those days was reckoned to be almost unheard of, and the monks and Guy of Gisborne, their steward at Birkencar, hated Robin and his free speech as much as Robin hated them for their tyranny and oppression. "Pity it is I was away," said Robin in reply to Scarlet's last words, "but you could have gone to Outwoods, and Scadlock would have given you food." "Aye, Master Robin," said Scarlet, "you have ever been the good and true friend of us all. But I too have been a free man, and I cannot beg my bread. You have made enemies enough on your behalf, and on our behalf, as it is, and I would not live upon you to boot. No, while there is deer in the greenwood, I and the little lad shall not starve. Besides, Master Rabbit, you should look to yourself. If your unfriends had known how long you would be away, they would, it hath been whispered, have proclaimed you an outlaw, and taken your land in your absence, and killed you when you returned." Robin laughed. "Aye, I have heard of it while I was away." Scarlet looked in wonder. He thought he had been telling his friend a great and surprising secret. "You have heard of it?" he replied, "now that it's passing strange." Robin made no answer. He knew well that his enemies were only looking out for an opportunity of thrusting him to ruin. Many a man going on a long journey had come back to find that in his absence his enemy had made oath to a justice that he had fled on account of some wrongdoing, and thus had caused him to be proclaimed an outlaw, whose head anyone could cut off. Suddenly, from a little way before them, came the sound as if a squirrel was scolding. Then there was silence for a space, and then the cry, a lonely, sad cry it was, as of a wolf. Instantly Robin stopped, laid the long bow he had in his hand at the root of a great oak, together with the arrows from his girdle. Then, turning to Scarlet, he said, in a low, stern voice, "Place the deer's meat you have in your tunic beside me. Quick, man, ere the foresters see your bulging breast. You shall have it safely enough." Almost mechanically, at the commanding tone, Scarlet took the rough piece of hempen cloth in which he had wrapped the flesh of the doe from the breast of his tunic and laid it beside the bow and arrows. Next moment Robin resumed his walk. When they had gone a few steps, Scarlet looked round at the place where they had placed the things. They were gone. A cold chill seemed to grip his heart, and he almost stopped, but Robin's stern voice said, "Step out, man, close behind." Poor Scarlet, sure that he was in the presence of witchcraft, did as he was bidden, but crossed himself to fend off evil. Next moment the narrow path before them was blocked by the forms of two burly foresters, with bows at their backs and long staves in their hands. Their hard eyes looked keenly at Robin and Scarlet, and for a moment it seemed that they meditated barring their way. But Robin's bold look as they advanced made them change their minds, and they let him pass. When freeman and villain are found together, scoffed one, there's ill brewing for their lord. And when two foresters are found together, said Robin, with a short laugh, some poor man's life will be sworn away ere long. I know ye, Robert of Locksley, said the one who had first spoken, as your betters know ye, for a man whose tongue wags too fast. And I know ye, Black Hugo, replied Robin, for a man who swore his best friend to ruin, to join his few poor acres to thine. Black Hugo looked at Robin as if he would have thrown himself upon him, but Robin's fearless eyes overawed him, and he suddenly turned away without another word. Robin and Scarlet resumed their walk and at last came to the top of an incline where the land sloped down to the cultivated fields and the pastures which surrounded the little village of Gillian's huts, with the manor house of a distance beyond the village halfway up another slope. Scarlet looked keenly about him to see if anyone in the fields had seen him coming from the forest, for he had run from his work of dike building to shoot the deer and wondered whether his absence had been discovered. If it had, he didn't care for the scourging post and the whip on his bare back, which might be his portion tomorrow when the steward's men found his work only half done. At any rate, his little lad, Gilbert of the White Hand, would have a king's supper that night. Would he? He suddenly remembered and again shook in fear. Where had Robin's bow and arrows and his venison disappeared? Had some goblin or elf snatched them up, or had he really looked in the wrong place, and had the foresters found them by now? He clenched his jaw and looked back, his hand upon his knife, almost expecting to see the two foresters coming after him. "Hallo," said Robin carelessly, "there are my bow and arrows and your venison, lad." Turning, Scarlet saw the things laying beside a tussock of grass, where he was certain he had looked a moment before and seen nothing. "Master," he said, in an odd voice, "this is sheer wizardry. I feared for you if on friends learned you are helped by the evil spirits that dwell in the forests." "Scarlet," said Robin, "I thought thou wert a wiser man, but like the rest thou seemed to be no more than a fool. Have no fear for me, my friends of the woods are quite harmless, and are no worse than thou or I." "Master," said Scarlet, sorry for his hasty speech, "I crave pardon for my fool's words. My tongue ran before my thoughts, for the sight of those things where nothing had been a moment before frightened me. But I know there cannot be worse things in the woods than there are in strong castles and abbots, palaces whose masters oppresses and maim poor villains. Say, master, is that which has helped us but now, is it a brownie, as men call it, a troll?" Robin looked quietly into Scarlet's face for a moment or two without speaking. "Scarlet," he said, "I think I see a time before us when thou and I will be much together in the greenwood. Then I will show thee my friends there. But until then, Scarlet, not a word of what has passed today. Thou swearest it?" "By the gentle Virgin," said Scarlet, throwing up his hand as he took the oath. "Amen," replied Robin, doffing his cap and bending his head at the name. "Now," he went on, "take thy meat and hand me my bow and arrows, for I must pack to the greenwood. And tell my little man Gilbert that Robin wishes him to get well quickly, and I would go shooting with him again on the uplands of the Pulvers." "This is my stop. This is New Orleans. You said you were getting off in New Orleans as well. Well, maybe I'll meet you again sometime and we can continue reading Robin Hood. I'm not one for company usually, but this was nice. Thank you very much for this experience. I appreciated it. If I did have a child, I would have liked to read this to them. Thank you. What am I doing in New Orleans? I have something I must get here. Some supplies can only be gotten in New Orleans, so... Actually, no, I'm not from around here. I am from Louisiana, but I work at the Freakshow. Yes, you've heard of it, Victoria's Freakshow. I hope to see you around. I hope you come to the Freakshow. I think that you will enjoy it immensely. Alright, well, happy on your way for your business in Orleans. I wish the best for you. Thank you.